Today we're going to be looking at curriculum. First question is, what is curriculum? As you can see, it acts as a filtering mechanism and an ordering mechanism. Curriculum is not a simple listing of the content. What it is a collection of decisions that relate to the selection, ordering, emphasis, and breadth of the treatment of the content elements that are chosen to be presented to the students, and it also helps with the assessment of students' proficiency levels in those content elements. Instruction focuses on the specific means of achieving the purposes of the overall plan reflected in the curriculum. Curriculum is the grand strategy, and instruction is the tactics used to achieve the ends implied by that strategy. The following slides are partially taken from Ornstein and Hucken's book. There may be some direct quotes, and in other instances, paraphrasing of their work. When looking at different approaches to the curriculum, it often reflects the writer or the user's own view of education. The position that one takes when looking at the curriculum also encompasses one's own theory of how we learn, the knowledge that is deemed common and important within a field of study, as well as the practical principles of the curriculum. As enactors of the curriculum, teachers interpret, modify, augment, and choose selectively from any materials that are made available to them. They draw on their own professional background as an important content accuracy screen. If the teacher has doubts about the accuracy of the content, then he or she will at minimum check other reliable sources to either confirm their suspicions or modify them to fit their own understanding of what is accurate. By understanding your own approach to learning and ultimately teaching, as well as the prevailing curriculum approach of the district or school in which you work, it is possible to determine if your view conflicts with that organizational view. Your approach to learning will more than likely also be your approach to teaching. If you like order, you will tend to approach each lesson in a sequential manner. If your approach is to look at the whole picture, then begin your work, you will tend to be random in your method. There's nothing wrong with either approach, other than you need to recognize it and be able to adapt your teaching to also meet not only the district's needs, but the individual students within your classroom. Over time, most school districts and schools tend to become committed to one particular view or approach to curriculum. There are two major approaches here. One is the technical and the other non-technical. The technical focuses on the subject matter, keeping the students and society in mind throughout the development of the curriculum, while the non-technical focuses on the student and on his or her needs and interests, with secondary attention to the subject matter. The technical approach tends to see the classroom as specific with specific goals and objectives. The non-technical tends to think that one should have nothing in mind as you begin working with students and let the curriculum develop. Both have good things and bad things. One of the flaws for the technical is that it tends to be too strict and stringent and does not consider all types of students and learning styles. For the non-technical, it tends to be vague and has no focus, leading to confusion and vast differences among districts and among classrooms within the districts. We need to have a blending of both so that we can make sure that all students are being served in the best possible manner. There are three major approaches that we're going to look at. The first one is the behavioral approach. It is the major approach to curriculum and has been in use for over 90 years. It's logical and prescriptive, relies on technical and scientific principles, includes paradigms, models, and step-by-step strategies for formulating the curriculum. It's usually based on a plan or a blueprint. You have goals and objectives that are very specific. The content and activities are sequenced to coincide with those goals and objectives, and learning outcomes are evaluated in relation to those goals and objectives. This is the approach to which other newer approaches are compared, and it is modeled after business and industry, with it being developed for efficiency. Ensuring efficiency meant eliminating small classes, increasing student-teacher ratios, hiring fewer administrators, cutting costs in teacher salaries, maintaining or reducing operational costs, and so forth. Later theorists developed a curriculum that combined curriculum, instruction, and evaluation into one simple plan. This gave those planning the curriculum more latitude in the decisions they made. This latter approach also combined behaviorism with progressivism and constructivism. By looking at this list on what behaviorism in the classroom looks like, you can tell that it is very prescriptive. This works well for those who are concrete sequential in their learning style, but tends to be less effective for those who are abstract random. The next approach is the cognitive constructivist approach, which is humanistic. It's more closely connected to elementary school. The lessons tend to be based on life experiences, group games, group projects, artistic endeavors, field trips, social enterprises, and learning centers. The planned curriculum is not the only one to consider, as there is also informal or a hidden curriculum. This approach sees art, music, literature, and the humanities on an equal basis with science and mathematics. It focuses on cooperative learning, independent learning, and small group learning. The child or student has input into the curriculum and shares responsibility with parents, teachers, and specialists. The teachers also have more input in curriculum development and instructional decision-making. Many tend to believe that the future needs thinkers rather than feelers. There are a significant number of people who do believe, however, that there is an interdependence between cognition and affect. They believe that education must focus both on the personal and the interpersonal, or in other words, the whole child. This list of statements for the cognitive constructionist approach shows that it tends to focus on student attitudes. It will work well with some learners, but not with others. It will also be much more difficult to meet accountability standards, which is why at this time we are moving back to the more behavioral model of curriculum, as we can assess it more easily. The final one is the social constructivist approach. Some see this approach as an extension of the cognitive constructivist approach, while others see it as having no approach at all. This approach focuses more on understanding than on developing curriculum. People who are part of this approach see the curriculum as something that is past or passé. They also tend to be theorists rather than practitioners. There is no one precise and certain way to create curricula. Curriculum development tends to be open-ended, interactive, and a part of the communal conversation. It is that communal conversation that is the center of the social constructivist approach. Those who believe in this approach see the school as being in the world. It exists as an interacting peer system with the political, economic, and social systems of the world. Because it is part of the world, the school's purpose is not to fit students into the world, into a static society, but rather to enable them to be transformed and to transform that society. So we've looked at several approaches. We've also talked about what curriculum is, but what's the teacher's role in curriculum? Although many teachers may emerge as curriculum leaders, many people believe that the major responsibility of administrators and supervisory personnel should be to provide leadership and assistance in curriculum development and implementation. This is especially true in areas such as budget, grant writing, and interaction with the school board. So with all this said, the curriculum today still tends to be very behavioristic in approach. This does not mean that cognitive constructivists and social constructivists should be ignored. Within the standards that have been developed, there is room for both. The curriculum just needs to be a melding of all of these approaches. Standards across the curriculum have now been developed. These standards are at the national level and are very broad in order to meet this country's diversity. In the following slides, we will talk about standards and their impact on education. There are several questions to ponder as we look at standards and the curriculum. But the one that we need to think about most is, what do students know, and is it of any value? This is one of those things that makes it very difficult for anyone who is working with curriculum, because what I may consider important, someone else may not. So we need to be able to negotiate and compromise in order to come up with what is important. The standards that were developed at the national level. Again, those national level standards are very, very broad, and they focus on the content. There are also standards on teaching and on assessment, but the main one is on the content. Within the content standards, they want to focus on what the student should know or be able to do as a result of instruction. There are 3 different types of content standards. One is procedural. The procedural focus on and identify processes students need to master. Declarative standards identify the basic information students need to know about specific topics. And contextual standards identify the knowledge and skills that will take on a particular meaning because of the special conditions in which they occur. Along with these standards, we then have performance indicators or benchmarks. These are developed to give more precise descriptions of the intended learning outcomes and provide a clear description of learning expectations for students that are consistent with the students' ages and developmental levels. They describe those expected behaviors in specific terms, and they also provide useful beginning points for assessment specialists when developing tests that tie clearly to the related content standards. So why have states adopted standards? Well, the states take the national standards, they narrow those down for their state, but they're still going to be very broad. And the idea is to give them an opportunity to be able to allocate scarce resources, to assess the impact of programs on students, to deploy statewide expertise to attack common educational problems, to improve levels of student performance, and promote educational equity. The idea behind these standards is to make sure that everyone within that state is learning basically the same thing. But how do the standards help the classroom teacher? Well, they show the teacher what the student knows, the cognitive outcomes, and what the student is able to do, their skills. Even with this, the teachers continue to ask, how can we meet standards and still have meaningful learning? Well, learning requires conceptual change. A teacher must use varying processes as one activity does not generate change on its own. Teachers also need to monitor those processes to make sure that the students are learning. In other words, as they are going through these standards and as they are teaching to the curriculum, they need to be assessing. Because if they're not assessing, learning could lead to a misconception or a wrong understanding. And those are very difficult to change once they have been established. The curriculum and standards would mean nothing without learning. Therefore, it is up to the teacher to be aware of the standards and the curriculum and to follow them as closely as possible when teaching, so that the students are gaining the knowledge deemed important by the nation, by the state, and by their district.